Thank you. A warm welcome from my side. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody wherever you are online. A big welcome to our little joint series together with the German Red Cross on the 20th anniversary of the tsunami in the Indian Ocean in December 2004, on its history, its challenges, and its groundbreaking issues coming up on humanitarian action, and which lessons we might have learned. We would like to kick off this series of events looking back today by looking into major challenges of this devastating crisis in a week's time in another online event, and by looking into maybe the key question, what would be different if a similar crisis would happen today on 3rd of December at a panel in Berlin. But so in the first place, we would like to look back today, and to do so maybe in a bit different approach than we usually do these talks, when we are often very policy oriented, pretty analytical, etc., and rather ask ourselves and our excellent guests I will introduce in a second, what actually happened 20 years ago? How did you learn about it? What did it do to you and your personal and professional life and career and situation? And why has this whole crisis been such a milestone for humanitarian aid, of course, for the affected people and regions, and maybe also for your organization and yourself? So what happened in 2004? Well, I've been already in my 30s and I'm an old white man. Many of our regular audience has been still kids or at most students. So we would like to give, in a nutshell, a spotlight kindly provided in the first place by the German Red Cross in a video of 60 seconds to give some impressions, what happened, and sharing a couple of facts right after. So let's take a quick look. Thank you. So to sum it up, an earthquake with a magnitude of more than 9 hit very close to Sumatra, the Indonesian coast, on 26th of December. It followed a massive tsunami with waves of up to 30 meters. It resulted in the deadliest natural disaster of the 21st century until today. 14 countries have been affected, as we learned, and had repercussions all the way even to Mexico, South Africa, or could be even measured in Alaska. And to give another indication of the magnitude, the mere shift of mass and the energy released slightly altered even the Earth's rotation, and by that the future length of a global day as we measure it today. On the humanitarian side, despite a delay of up to a couple of hours until several countries have been hit, all the casualties and victims have been taken by surprise by the disaster. And it followed a humanitarian response, as we read, which amounted to more than $40 billion. And just as this is just a number, if you compare it to what has been at that time the global humanitarian appeal in the same year for all other crises combined, that amounted to $3 billion. So it might give a sense why this has been really groundbreaking and a crisis in a totally new dimension. So this was more than a milestone. It's important to look back and to learn from it, especially if you look into the challenges we all face today. And I'm really happy to have 3 excellent guests on that one. And I would like to give the floor in the first place and ask where you've been to Mahesh Gunasekara. You are by profession a medical doctor at the time. You have been the head of mission in Sri Lanka of the Red Crescent. Today you are the general director. So you've been really in the region, and maybe I can ask you in the first place, where have you been, and where did you learn about this major disaster? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ralf. Actually, that particular day, I was working for the government as a medical doctor. That was my last days working for the government. I was about to join Sri Lanka Red Cross as the director health. So that particular weekend, really, I went back home, and then I got a call from my hospital. It was located in the eastern part of the country, saying that there's a massive disaster has happened. Really, the casualties are coming in. I ran back to my hospital, like it was a horrific, really, thing to see. There was about 200, 300 bodies, and there was lots of casualties coming in, people who have been drowned, and cuts and wounds and everywhere, really, which I had never seen so much of cuts and wounds, 400, 500 stitches went into some people who have been affected. Since then, really, that was 26 December. I joined Sri Lanka Red Cross on 1st of December as the director of operations. So I have been quite involved in from day zero with the operation from the health side as a medical doctor, providing care for people. Since then, after the 4 days after, really, I took off the job of really running the tsunami response recovery operation for Sri Lanka Red Cross. Went into a big operation, as you said, really, for us, it's more than $1 billion in Sri Lanka.
Thank you so much for this very first impression. And moving on quickly to our second guest, Cornelia Füllkrug-Weitzel. You've been for more than 20 years in the leadership of German Bread for the World and its humanitarian sister body, Diakonie, Katastrophenhilfe. And at the point, you've been also in charge of operations related to the tsunami response. As there is a camera issue for a while at your end, we are more than grateful that you can join us also by photo, and we could hear you very well in the technical test. So over to you. Where have you been? How did you learn about it?
I was sitting in my car with my family, and we were driving from Stuttgart, where our office is, to Vienna, where we wanted to start our holidays. And I received a phone call that something dramatic and extraordinary has happened. And first reports came in from partners, so the office informed me about that, and then told me that already the broadcasting station, the first German public channel, has been informed, of course, and is asking for somebody to come to comment on that. I was hesitating because I said, what can I comment if I know only so little? But still, they kind of, my staff forced me to go to Munich.
Now you're muted. Füllkrug-Weitzel, if you could unmute. Yes,
so I went to the studio, and while driving there, I got more and more informations, and but I would say we still were quite innocent. And the following days, the result of, I was on my mobile all the time. My family complained about it. There was no joint holiday at all. And finally, we skipped the plan and went back and just finished the holidays at all. So I went back to the office, and then we were actively, mainly the respecting staff for the region was active day and night. I can say even 7 days a week, at least 12 hours a day. It was extraordinary. So, but I will stop here.
Mm-hmm. Many thanks for that. Just repeating maybe for everybody who doesn't recall this precise date for Christians in the region and all over the world. Of course, it has been a very special day, 26th of December, Christmas Day, where so many people have been on holidays and been taken by surprise, also in the international community.
Ralf, may I just say that we are working with partners all over the world. So we have Breath of the World and Diakonie Katastrophenhilfe altogether have more than 3,500 partners. So we had many partners in the region. So when I say we started working, it was communicating with the partners and preparing for the response.
Yes, many thanks. And coming back to that in a minute when we talk about the rapid response, while moving on now from the crucial local and now the German level to the international one. Katrin Wirsching, you're bringing an international perspective. You've been in various leadership positions with ICRC, including being the Deputy Director General. And at that time, if I'm not misled, you've been the desk officer for the Indonesia response. When and how did you learn about it?
So at the time, actually, I was in New York, and I was actually in a scholarship program with the United Nations. I wasn't working for the German Red Cross. I had done an internship with them before. And so basically my parents called me and they were like, which floor are you on? Can you just move up higher? So this is how I actually got to learn about the tsunami response. Of course, there was no wave coming, but that wasn't known at the time anyway. Yeah, so it led me basically to offer my services for the German Red Cross, but I was in New York when it happened.
So the dimension has been that bad that people even felt they need to warn friends and family all over the world, just in case it might be hit as well. Many thanks for this very, very first impression. Coming back now to Mahesh, you gave already a very blunt indication how fast the crisis hit the country in your job and your role as a doctor. Maybe if you could elaborate a bit on top of that. So on this very first day, it seems you straight away went back to hospital, if I got that right. And what happened then? And maybe you can also share an indication, when did you get a sense of this is a crisis of a really new dimension and of its overall magnitude?
Yeah, it has been quite a strange experience for us, really, back in Sri Lanka. Like, we never heard the word of tsunami, really, just before we knew it. It's landed in, there are so many jokes around that as well. So when it happened, really, when we see, like, we were a country, hit with the conflict also so we have been dealing with casualties, bodies, and really the people who have been wounded. But in my whole medical career, really, up till today, really, I haven't seen such a large magnitude of things happened in my life. It was very devastating, like, the way people have been just like, sitting in the hospital, even really, before I start my humanitarian work, it really changed my career, how I look at things, how I deal with things, how I offer my services to people. So that was my first stepping stone to become an international humanitarian worker who have been working around the world for the last 20 years since then. Now, it even really, for us really as medical doctors, starting from the very beginning, there was some quite significant things, the way we have changed the way we work. We had to work because how to deal with such a large number of casualties, how to provide services, because around the coastal belt, really, like more than about 70% of the whole coastal belt of the country has been affected. So we are a small island, really, the 70%, it's then that really you have seen these horrific pictures, really, what has really happened. So it's if you walk around this area, it was really haunting. Bodies were everywhere. It has not, and there's nobody to identify them. Because, like, so we don't have any storing facilities, how to deal with it. Then so identification of them, quite a lot of unplanned or either really unimagined, really. We never expected these things to happen, really, before tsunami hit. So it turned the whole landscape of really, the way of we are working as humanitarian workers, and not only as putting up my government hat, even the way we worked. And how ourselves have been organized, really, then really even constructions, things, quite a lot of things has been changed. So I can go on and on and on and saying that really, because I saw it for the first time. I remember really we went to a hospital and donated an ambulance and came back. And when I went back to the same hospital, that hospital was fully damaged. The ambulance was sitting in an electricity pole.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so this is what it is really, you know. So I saw that ambulance is just like there on top of that electricity pole.
And may I ask, what did it mean for you the days after? You mentioned already you went straight back to the hospital. There have been so many victims all of a sudden. Did you need to work like straightforward through it for the next days, and all your colleagues needed to do so? But at the same time, infrastructure has been damaged as well, etc. So the challenge must have been immense.
Yes, damage has been immense, but in the other way around, really, you know, it's quite interesting what happened in Sri Lanka. Like, you know, first couple of days, so basically, you know, it's 24/7 continuously providing services to people really who have been, you know, first really, you know, there was it's a big emergency. Lots of people have been drowned, and really then we had very limited facilities, so we had to take care of the patients. So my colleagues and really, you know, the staff has been continuously, you know, working around the clock. Then the daytime really, we started going towards the communities and seeing that really how we can assist, not that everybody has come or where are the missing people. So the people and there were search and rescue teams went on for people and the bodies as looking for bodies. So then for me, like, you know, being a medical doctor, in charge of a medical doctor, I had a massive responsibility to really, so looking at really, you know, a side where you don't see, where taking care of the dead. So families has been affected really, and then so we don't have facilities to really, you know, keep them. So we have to give them a dignified sendover, and large number of documentation, 200, 300 really dead bodies has to be dealt within the next 24 hours. Really, it's a humongous task. So we have to deviate from the standard procedure and managing things and make sure that really, you know, so that send-off has been quite a challenge for us while taking care of the people who have been really, you know, struggling for their life.
And if I may ask, as you shared that I think for 12 years you worked with the Ministry of Health before, so you've been really also a government expert. How prepared has been Sri Lanka itself as a country been that such a disaster could happen, and to prepare for such a crisis?
No, we were not prepared for that. We were not prepared for that. We were prepared for, like, you know, that time the conflict was going on. We were prepared to take care of large number of casualties, but really, you know, not in this magnitude. And it's still really, you know, that was not really in the cards really of really, you know, even we can't comprehend. We were not been able to comprehend that type of thing could happen really in Sri Lanka really. It had been quite a safe country, other than really for natural disasters, other than just seasonal floods. Not for this type of, we were not prepared at all.
Thank you so much for now, but coming back in a second on a couple of questions, how then things evolved. Maybe moving on to Katrin Wirsching on the international response. So you've been in New York in the first place, but then very quickly have been asked to manage the Indonesia response, the other country hit that harsh by the tsunami, at least talking in terms of numbers of casualties. So what happened then? You've been engaged from one day to the other by the German Red Cross, or what was the next step?
Yeah, I think I started with them around February, so there was a bit of a gap. And as you know, the Red Cross movement launched a massive response, you know, both in Sri Lanka and Indonesia, and in some of the other countries as well, of course. But when I came in, it was actually the phase when it was moving into early recovery, and when we started to really think about reconstruction, all at the same time. As Mahesh saying, people were absolutely exhausted when I arrived. I mean, I took over from the colleagues. They hadn't basically slept. It was kind of nonstop, as everybody was saying before me. And I can tell you that that kept on being that way. I mean, I would say almost for the whole year. It was different kinds of pressures, but it was still that way. So so in a way, we had still the ongoing response, like primary healthcare unit, water treatment units, and things going on. And at the same time, we were really trying to see, okay, how could we best make a contribution? And this in a very complex coordination environment, because there were so many players. I mean, alone from the Red Crescent movement in Indonesia, you had next to the Indonesian Red Cross, Palang Merah, you had some 20 national societies coming in. You had originally the ICRC had a presence, the rest of the national societies didn't have a presence, apart from, of course, the Indonesian Red Cross on the ground, because there was still a conflict. It was a low flaring conflict. Thankfully, it wasn't getting worse. It was rather getting better over the time. But yeah, it was quite a complex endeavor. And what I also noted right from the beginning when I started, so again, this is two months down the line, were the increasing pressures really from the donors, from the public. What happened with the money? When do we see results? When is the reconstruction done? And that was juxtaposed, obviously, with the whole question of how do you reconstruct? Where do you reconstruct? What are the building standards? That you can't just export the building standard from Germany into another place, So yeah, there were huge issues, many issues.
Right. Maybe looking a bit again in the kickoff, you mentioned already it was a major challenge to coordinate, and you shared kindly what it meant even internally in the German Red Cross or locally with the national societies. And of course, we know by now that that has been one of the top challenges of the whole response and one of the key lessons learned, hopefully. But what did it mean for you to kick it off? I mean, starting maybe with the magnitude of the crisis. I mean, of course, you have a global network, but a crisis hitting 14 countries in total and a series of countries really, really harshly. What does it mean, and what was overwhelming and maybe not possible by any means to do well?
Okay, I think one of the big learnings from the time was, of course, that every actor came a little bit with what they were strong with, which wasn't necessarily the right complement to the local actor. So I think this whole thing around being strongly prepared as a local actor, and then as a local actor being able to really steer and say, this is where I need help, this is where I don't need help. This is an area, I think there was a lot of pressure on the local actors as well, that they get involved in things that they actually didn't want to get involved in for whatever reasons, because they, for example, felt this was a capacity they couldn't mount. This wasn't something that was aligning with their values, with their mission. I think there was quite a bit of that. It was not just a Red Cross thing. I think it was a general problematic, And I also felt, I mean, I was pushing back quite a bit on this at the time, that from the donor perspective, from certain donors, there were really expectations that one would, I don't know, build a certain football field in a certain area, and it had to be exactly in this area of a school, for example. Well, actually, that's not for the international actor to say. That is for the local education ministry to say what the needs are for the school pupils and what are the standards in a given region. So yeah, this was definitely one of the issues. There were many more, but
thank you so much, and indicating surely on the key question also on international local cooperation, and something to raise with Mahesh in a second. Frau Füllkrug-Weitzel, how was the first reaction and how doable was it given the magnitude of the crisis at the Diakonie, Katastrophenhilfe, and how could you coordinate in the very first place? We know that there have been so many challenges. What was your experience?
As I mentioned before, we are working through and whatever local NGOs, churches all over the world, and the same there. We have the contexts are very different in these mostly affected countries, including the question how many local partners we had and how capacitated they were. Let me give the example of India. We have an Indian partner since 30 or 40 years. This is a huge organization, They had, before the Indian government recently destructed that organization, they had hundreds of employees and more than 10,000 volunteers all over the country, because India is all the time hit by disasters of different sizes. So they are very experienced. So in this case, it was quite extremely easy. Because we knew there's a local partner who is highly capacitated, much more capacitated than we are. Of course, they were not, they did not have any knowledge when it comes to a disaster of that magnitude, as none had the capacity or the ability to really understand from the very first moment what was going on. But nonetheless, they had excellent methods to assess the situation, analyze, and do all these standardized steps you would do normally. And yet, of course, they were overwhelmed, but they had local presence in all the affected regions. So that was quite easy in brackets for us, just to trust them and to get into contact with them and to let them tell us what to do and what they need for their support. And we had partners, smaller partners in India as well as smaller partners in the other 3 mostly affected countries, where that was not the case. They were they had very different capacities and they were not very well prepared. And the first thing is, it made all of us, the partners, beside maybe the Indian one, plus us, aware how badly prepared we were, and that for a disaster of that kind, all our capacities were somehow really inadequate and maybe even inappropriate, and that we lacked, and that this was a most important, not the most important, one of the most important lessons, that we must go into much more preparation, disaster preparedness, and risk management, all these things. This is no way to start when the emergency hits the country or the place, but there needs to be a long story before, in order to really be able on the long-term run to do valuable humanitarian relief work in countries. So yeah. Secondly, of course, so we received from our partners, we received information as quickly as they could be as they could use communication tools and internet and so on. Of course, this depends where the communication infrastructure was hit. That was not very easy from the very beginning. But as soon as that was possible, we got the information and we started discussing with them. We were indeed, not from the very beginning, not everybody was did understand from the very first moment that this is going into a long story, the immediate response, and then later on reconstruction, rehabilitation, into the development phase. Bread for the World, for the very first time, received money without calling for it, at the same time as Diakonie, Katastrophenhilfe. That helped us very much to understand that we have to work together from the very beginning and to bring the issue of development together with the relief. So and that there is the development component from the very beginning of the disaster, and we have to take that into account from the very beginning. Even DKH, not only Bread for the World, but even DKH. The Bread for the World partners brought in from the very first moment, the human rights issue and the issue of marginalized, excluded groups, and the issue of women's who might be excluded, and made Diakonie Katastrophenhilfe aware that we have to pay special attention and put a special focus on the most vulnerable, which we normally did, but it was, as I said, increased here, for example, and that's what our Indian partner said as well. The official aid that became obvious during the weeks, the official aid and the aid of many international donors or donor agencies would not reach and did not reach, for example, Dalit communities, and for structural, systematic or structural asymmetric power reasons, they would be excluded from the aid. So we had the chance to bring that in, but we had to learn it more and more. And to name another challenge, which has not been named, Katrin mentioned the huge flow of money and the huge number of organizations, communities, what have you, individuals who wanted to do something and who wanted to show solidarity. And all of them, when we are talking about organizations or like communities, all of them wanted to implement their own standards, as Katrin has said. And that is, but not enough. I got many calls from people who said, I want to help, send me to the region. And I said, okay, do you know any language spoken in any of these countries? No. Do you have any professional knowledge which might be of help there? No. And after a while, I remember one call, and I said, so what would what did make you think that you could? He wanted to go to India. What makes you thinking that you would be of help now there? And he said, because I can give them my hand. And I said, what do you mean by give them my hand? Yeah, I can, you know, you can see it everywhere where there's the flood, you need people to clean up the space and so on and so on. I said, and then I said, do you believe that India doesn't have hands enough?
Right.
And then the guy, and then the guy said, yeah, maybe hands enough, but they don't have this culture of solidarity and of helping each other. I share that story because it made me aware very bluntly that we are talking about the international donor and recipient system in a context of deep racism. So that was
many things. Yes,
it was so
many
obvious.
things.
And I told this person, listen, when we had the flood in Mozambique, we were supporting Mozambican partners. When we then had the flood in Germany, in Dresden, this Mozambican partners whose capacity we had strengthened called me and said, let me send to you 40 skilled professionals in flood relief. And I said, that is wonderful. That's really wonderful. And I would have loved to accept that if I was not knowing that already at that time in Dresden, there was quite a racist mood in general. So, but I told that story, this guy who called me, who wanted to go to India, and I said, would you have accepted people from Mozambique in Dresden? And he said, no, of course, what should they do there? And I said, okay, what should you do there?
Yeah, so, point well taken, Füllkrug-Weitzel. I would like to share this perspective with Mahesh, as he's been in the operations in Sri Lanka at that point in time. So we heard how the whole international machinery started. Of course, we heard from you how, as so often, the local response started straight away and tried to take care of as much of the needs as possible. So what was your experience? What happened when the international assistance came in? As we heard, of course, it was much needed on the one hand, but how did it evolve? What happened and what was your experience? How well it was done?
Yeah, that was quite interesting. What has really happened now? After a couple of days, really, now you started seeing really the partners from the international humanitarian response has started moving their machinery. I see, like after 5 days, I joined the Sri Lanka Red Cross as the director of operations. I had to coordinate with 26 Red Crescent partners really sitting around me, and it was a coordination nightmare. So now this is something really, I think really the coordination was the key really, like it was such a big disaster. Like by the time really we were a small Red Cross society, small organization, bombarded with like, we were about 40, 50 staff maximum. And you had to deal with 26 partners. Just imagine the coordination nightmare. But everybody came with very in good faith to help the people who have been affected. So that's what I said. It went on 24/7. Really, we start around 6 in the morning. It goes up to 1 in the night and go home and come back. And by then the whole operation mechanism started coming into the country. And then there again, like, it's not based on the need of the ground, maybe really, but they think it would be useful, really. That's the people that become, I think, has never been generous like this, I think, really, in our life. People had been really very, very generous. So sometimes things what we see in really, the things what necessary and unnecessary, both has pouring into the country. So the airports have been full, really, more than the capacity which they can handle. So it's just like a floodgate, really, the doors have been open, everything is coming in, really, declared, undeclared, really, So like now, see whether now, when in the scenario of Sri Lanka, we have a very good public health system. Then after 2 kilometers from the coast, things have been perfectly normal. So, but 80% of the coast has been badly affected. Large number of people has lost their homes, lives, and they are living in camps. But we see field hospitals coming in, very high-tech, very large hospitals coming in, which was not necessary because there's no time to, whatever you had your in the stops deployed and has been deployed, planes are coming in and things are going out and just landed somewhere, you are keep on erecting. Because like, you go 4 kilometers away, really, you just have to go to the hospital and you get your medicine. But they might need it really, like, these are the things really, what we have started seeing. For us, even Red Cross, like, we had our standard way of providing relief. Now, as she said, really, this is going beyond our all routine relief activities. It's like, from day one, we had to think about what are we going to do with this money, what we has been really, raised to help people. So then we have to move into development work. No question about that. Now, so much of partners, so much of money coming in now, people have started competing for humanitarian space. So I have never seen that really, in competing for humanitarian space, like, always really, the humanitarian, as humanitarians, we struggle to raise money, really, what is needed to help people. So we initially went along with what we can offer, like basic relief, then, but really all the, like, relief stuff has been exhausted. Then really the procurement processes, and to ensure that transparency and accountability, really you have to go through the routine processes. Then really, then things has to started coming out from really, different countries. May not be everything is needed in that local context. Then for us, really, it took quite a significant number of time, really, to agree on the operational framework. What are we really going to do as a movement in this country for next 5 to 6 years, really, or something really, until we complete our commitment. So it took quite a significant amount of time and really, go into initial response. While running the initial response, which we had the capacity with the volunteers and ground with as Red Cross, Red Crescent, since we have been embedded in the community. So we come from there. So that is the place where we had our strength. Initial response was good, but it had its gaps, but it was humongous. We were not being able to really, do if I look back, I do things differently. I also really, so much of new young humanitarian professionals are coming in, to the system. I think many of us have been at this age, most of them came through that time.
And may I ask also, maybe if I may, on a personal level, how much did you sense there was a readiness to listen to your experience, to listen to your know-how, to your background or to the one of colleagues or the communities themselves?
Initially, I was quite frustrated.
Mm.
So that it's honestly, I can say that I had been quite frustrated. Like, people have been not listening to me, and really, people who have been experienced enough has come in and seeing, like, still I didn't feel that these are not my people needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember one time I was telling them, really, guys, really, just stop this nonsense, really, and just let's look back and really try to assist the people, who have been really, my people have been affected. So it's our responsibility to look after them and address their needs, not that what you need.
Mm-hmm. So you really sense the mandate-driven and not a needs-driven response, at least in the first phase.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
please.
why I politely said earlier, really agree on the operation framework and debates, and here and there, really, we had never-ending meetings to really, this is finally what we are going to do. By the meantime, really, pushing through the initial relief and really providing medical care, and cash for work and all these things. We just started really cleaning up the rubble and all these things, really, to get the ball rolling.
And maybe a final question on that one, if I may. Next week, we will discuss also in depth fundraising objectives of international organizations, competition between organizations. How much did you sense that this has been a driving force and maybe one of the reasons for sidelining perspectives from the local level?
Actually, to see, honestly, say, I didn't have time to think any of these things really that time, really. I have been really continuously, really, driven by really how we can really get the relief machine operating, really, and things. Because yeah, I didn't need to think about fundraising because funds are pouring in.
Yeah, no, point well taken. Maybe moving that question or directing that question to Katrin also with a question on. So we heard that the international response started really quickly and immensely and really with a lot of commitment, but also in a very dominant way, really being a wave of aid, as some people framed it, following the terrible tsunami. What was your experience? When did you sense that something might go wrong, either internally or with the whole sector and in the response? And what was the reaction of colleagues?
Yeah, I don't know how to put this. I mean, this was just such a massive, massive, massive disaster in so many places that were simultaneous affected. I mean, in hindsight, you could say it should have, first one should have done a needs assessment, and then one should have done this, and then one. But in a situation like that, I mean, there's also a bit of a no, sorry to use the word, but like a kind of a no regrets. I mean, you go with what you actually, I mean, the emergency response units that the Red Cross has, they're all based on previous, so they're always refined after bigger crisis. So they were going in the different national societies with the emergency response units, and I'm sure some of them were more helpful than others. And I think then it was more actually the question, how brave are you to tell the public that not everything that was done was maybe the most needed, but there was sure a whole lot of things that were actually needed. And the other thing is also was just the shifting gears between I remember we were calling it the tsunami and the tsunami, but the shifting gears from the emergency response really to the recovery and the reconstruction. And it was really like a very, very heavy lift, because in parallel you still had to operate, and in parallel you had to start to plan and see what makes the most sense for the local actor, for the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. What is the most principled? I mean, we have our fundamental principles. How do we ensure in contexts like Sri Lanka, like Indonesia, we're really acting by our humanitarian principles, and that under the pressure and the observation from the public, basically, which was expecting very quick results. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there were so many challenges that we had to deal with along the way. And we basically, we had to, kind of deal with whatever the challenges were. So whether that is then also, I mean, like as mentioned colleagues before, how do we make sure we're really the most accountable to the affected people, managing maybe some political dynamics that as an external party you're not necessarily aware, maybe as a national actor you don't necessarily want to speak to. So how do we manage that? How do we manage, I mean, there was a lot of discussion around the corruption risk and the risk that money would be embezzled. So how do we make sure our processes are solid? I mean, we haven't been an international, as German Red Cross, to my best knowledge, we hadn't been a, international construction, organization that was mounting a construction response. So how do we do that? How do we find the right qualified, staff, both locally, but also internationally? I mean, there were just so many challenges. We just had to deal with them. And, I mean, on the coordination side, maybe the other point, I mean, it was a heavy lift. I think the Red Cross learned a lot from it. We have regular, discussions around how do we improve coordination? How do we make sure we have a really strong local Red Cross, Red Crescent society. But like at the time, I mean, I remember there were like different working groups set up. I don't know, it was probably the same in Sri Lanka, but yes, there was one that was specifically focusing on the health recovery. There was one that was focusing on the construction. There was one focusing on the psychosocial, mental health response, because let's not forget, and that was particularly dramatic in Indonesia, because there the people had felt the earthquake before the wave came, and there were constant after shocks and earthquakes. I mean, it's the ring of fire, so people were traumatized. People were looking for their, I think until today, I remember there was like 10 years later, a child was still found alive, so people have hopes, probably still today have the hope that they actually might find a loved one by chance, because maybe they lost their consciousness and forgot about who they were, but maybe they, so there were really so many issues to deal with. And, in a nutshell, I think we've all grown with it. We've learned a lot. And I also kind of feel like that we've definitely made a good impact. It was definitely not perfect, but I also think it's completely impossible under such circumstances that things might be perfect. It's just not possible.
And maybe just quickly coming back to this one question of needs-based versus mandate-driven. Of course, the German Red Cross and the whole movement made a major impact. On that one, you mentioned we haven't been a construction company or organization before, but all of a sudden there was a need to build houses, etc. Was that from your view, from hindsight? Was that needs-driven, mandate-driven, or how come, for example, the German Red Cross all of a sudden engaged in an area it hasn't been involved in before?
I mean, it had done shelter, it had supported shelter, but it was more like short-term shelter activities, to my knowledge. I mean, maybe there were some, but there was definitely not a whole lot of, experience prior to that, because, when do you have a tsunami of that size? I mean, it was definitely a combination of, I mean, the need was there. People had lost their houses. And as Mahesh was saying, I mean, there was this whole 2 kilometers from the coastline, which was completely destroyed. And, so there was definitely a housing need. And there was the money was available, the money had to be spent. So, and there was a whole discussion with the government authorities, with the Palang Merah at the time, with the other Red Cross partners, who would do what. So I think it's a combination. I mean, it was definitely not just mandate driven. I mean, the very initial of it is that there was a need. Yeah, and then it was maybe more around how do we make sure it's local standard housing, like, because of course you would like to build we were always saying you cannot build a Porsche when everybody else lives, in a VW. So, I mean, to give a bit of an example, but yeah.
Thank you.
Quite a lot of Red Crosses that were getting into construction at the time, just because the needs were in the reconstruction phase. This was the main, needs that required a lot of funding, and we had funding. So
Mahesh, maybe addressing this example quickly back to you, as we touch on it right now. And by chance, an international colleague of mine shared the very same example when he hinted on what happened in the international community a while after the crisis, and all of a sudden, all kind of organizations appealed to, oh, we will build 10,000 houses, oh, we will build 20,000 houses, etc., because there was this need, and everybody understood as a donor that you have to do this. But of course, a lot of organizations went into business, which hasn't been their core mandate or their comparative advantage, at least before. So how did you follow this? What was your experience? How did, for example, this area evolve, or on the, if that's more of your background, or on the infrastructure side, on the health system, etc., in Sri Lanka? How did it evolve a little while after the emergency hit?
As Katrin said, really, I think what we have, the initial, as I said, initial was chaos, but we did some very beautiful work for the people in the country, because I think it became very needs driven, really. Then the teams came in, you did the analysis and you identified the needs. So we did quite a lot of, back in Sri Lanka also, we did quite a lot. So it's a combination of, say, humanitarian assistance and going to more development. So went from there, as I said from the very beginning, we went up to the development level. Like, it's like, that's the thing really we were talking about, build back better.
Mm-hmm.
So we started really, so we have to find a way. We have been dealing with shelter as a movement, but not that really permanent shelter, the permanent type of housing, really what we have been really building, we built in Sri Lanka, and really, and in the other times really we do really with our emergency response. Now, coming back there, really, we were been involved in quite a lot of support for building houses. So like, during tsunami really time reconstruction, really, we built about 50,000 houses in the country. So then after that, even really, with the expertise we had, really, we built another 25,000 houses for post-conflict recovery, fully owner-driven. So I think really we did a lot of community development also with that, really, with looking at different models. Even now, really, we are being really, that expertise we have in the country, we are known for that in the country so now we are dealing for marginalized communities. So then we moved into other areas where really there was lots of improvements were made on drinking water, where a large amount of investments has been done on really, for drinking water facility, improve the drinking water for people who have been affected, because whole infrastructure has been badly damaged. The hospitals has been really very well built, including went into more development, more. I think really, the money has been well spent in those areas where really, still we see that these investment people have been using. It's not that one time really you do an intervention and move out, but still I think, it has been benefited the people even today for the future.
Thank you, Mahesh. As time is running, if I could ask in a final round with the three of you, a final question to you. If there was one theme, one challenge, as so many lessons needed to be learned after this crisis, and a lot of things went wrong from hindsight, as analysis demonstrated, what would be the one thing you think we should discuss in our 2 follow-up sessions on this crisis, where we as a community, as a local, international one, etc., should take a deeper look into, and what would be a key point to discuss in the following 2 sessions? Frau Füllkrug-Weitzel, if I could address that to you in the first place, what would be your key ask, what we need to discuss deeper and deep dive into? Over to you.
Of course, the most important would be the meaning of partnership, or the changing roles between local partners and international donors and donor agencies. I think that is absolutely necessary, because I think the major failures and the major problems we caused within the societies all stem from an inappropriate approach of international donors towards the local NGOs, and ignoring local capacities, not involving them from the very beginning, from planning, designing everything, but rather using them as as instruments or as outsourced instruments, so to speak, and not to see the partnership in itself as a very crucial and important point of delivering aid in a sustainable and appropriate way, but rather see the partnership, see the partners as objects to deliver just relief, and to see delivering is the most important. That was the focus in tsunami times, of course, for good reasons, because we were under such pressure. But at the same time, if you don't take enough seriously the partnership and the role of and strengthening the capacity and role of locals, this is not going to be sustainable. The first phase of the tsunami response was disempowering local capacities so much that in many times we had kind of undermined their capacity before we entered into the phase of recovery and development, where we especially need the local capacities. So it kind of ruined rather than strengthened and empowered local organizations, and that should not happen again. And that is, of course, a lot is being discussed about localization, but it really needs a deep look into the lessons from the tsunami. That is one. And just a very short indication, we didn't touch that yet and might not touch it, but I mean, with Sri Lanka, we had a country in conflict, and with Indonesia partly as well. And I would believe and say that almost everyone was not really able to see the link and see how best you could deliver humanitarian aid in conflict situations. We had all these conflicting interests of local partners, depending on to which party they belonged, and we could not move without political considerations all the time. But most organizations, most international NGOs did not have a clue about the context. We didn't have enough clue as well. So didn't have a clue about the dynamics of this political conflict. And I think since we are facing more and more maybe violent conflict in the future, at least not less, we should look into that.
Thank you so much. Key question indeed. As in many other discussions we sense on responses in conflict settings and how far the way is to go for international organizations and donors on the locally led side. We assessed in a ranking last year on how commitments have been fulfilled. But with that, over to you, Katrin. What would you say is the key point we need to deep dive into and further look into in the next sessions, but also overall?
I mean, chances that we have a tsunami as such of this size in the near future are relatively small, but the climate crisis, all scientific evidence points to mega disasters that are not, that are going to affect the whole planet, so all kinds of countries. And I think it's really around, how are we prepared for this? And how do we make sure that we are accountable to affected populations? This topic of accountability to affected populations, it cuts through conflicts, it cuts through disasters, it cuts through crisis. But how are we ready, and how do we make sure, we're making it the most, impactful for the populations affected wherever they are?
Thank you so much, Katrin. And the final word belongs to Mahesh. Mahesh, what would you think is the key point to look into? And if I add at your end maybe one question, as it will be, of course, mainly the 20th anniversary of this crisis in Sri Lanka and in your country and in the other countries on the local level, could you give us some sense? How will people look into it? How will it be discussed? Is it something which is also a key date on the public side at your end? That would be very interesting to learn as well. Over to you.
Yeah, I take it as two questions. First one, I think really, there is an area really where you have to look into is now. Here we're looking at a massive international response with massive number of international partners. This is not you are directing directly at Red Cross, but we're looking at really all the international organizations in such a large disaster coming into a country, and really you have to work with the local partner. because there is no legal entity for you to operate really unless really you have been declared to do that. So now in such situations, you have to look at, you do your operations and you move out. But the thing really, you build in really bringing in lots of new things into this local actor, local partner, and you put local partner at huge risk. Also really, like lots of liabilities, lots of risks. So when you move out, really, how you look at the risks and liabilities, really, you are leaving behind to your local partner. That is something really, you had to, something really as humanitarian organizations, really, we have to look into that. Yeah, I still, after 20 years, I am dealing with a lot of things. So still, it had become another tsunami for me, really, to recover from that. So it leaves very large number of wounds also, really, when you have been really messy, everybody comes in, you hammer, and really you move out. Suddenly, you have a very exhausted local partner, really, just lost and seeing that really vulnerable. You make them very vulnerable. So how do you...
Point well taken and noted for the upcoming.
Yeah, this is something I think, after 20 years, really, we had to look into that and dig deep into that and see really how we can prevent that. Okay. So it's the 20 years of tsunami, really, after tsunami, it's still, I think for me, lots of things has changed, like, how we look at it, how we do our response, and especially, as she said, this quite a lot of preparedness work are going on. It's still really, I don't think really the chances are low, but it could happen. It has happened once, really, even the history, there has been saying that really such things incidents has happened. When you're looking at our histories, really certain incidents, we are talking about, it's a tsunami. So like, the preparedness work really, yes, quite a lot of things has been happened. And the commemoration also is happening, really. It's a couple of symposiums have been going on, really, on to commemorate this, and really, lots of technical discussions happening. So we have been planning some activities also. People who have been recovered and worked with tsunami, and we work together, really. So there will be something coming up, really, on the coming days, really. On 26th of December, yeah. We are up for that.
Very interesting. Many thanks for sharing that, and we wish you all the best for these activities as well, and for the memorial activities in your country. Many thanks to all of you joining us. Many thanks for all your time. I think that has been really an interesting and very personal kickoff, even learning that two of you entered actually the humanitarian sector against the backdrop of this very crisis. We will keep discussing these topics, and many thanks for feeding into it. If you like, we will meet again in 1 week time, talking in that point two of the key humanitarian challenges, especially I mentioned already fundraising and competition, but also prevention and anticipatory action next week, and then in a summarizing overall panel on the lessons learned and where we stand on similar crises and challenges in today's humanitarian action challenges. With that, a big thank you to everybody who dedicated its time here over lunch, but also late at night in Asia and in other regions. Thanks for joining us, and take care. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.